Mr. Speaker, for years, the Ghana Public Service Union has advocated increases ranging from 15 to 20% in wages and salaries in public service. I respectfully submit that the government could doubly afford to increase wages and salaries and the minimum wage. The reason being that they use only part of the earnings of this country to determine the earnings of public servants. What about missing funds, lotto funds, and the GGMC funds? These are not factored in the amount available for public servants' wages and salaries. The latter amounts are used to benefit supporters of the government with those capital projects. In this year's budget, the sum of $661,872,000 is budgeted for revision of wages and salaries. Yet, the employment costs are projected to increase by $4.6 billion. Mr. Speaker, the APNU calls on the government to stop fooling around with the lives and well-being of the public servants in their and to pay them a living wage. Job creation. We know, Mr. Speaker, that job creation is a function of investment. Foreign direct investment, I hardly hear anything about that. Local investment and investment by the government. But the market issues, the market issue shows that the question of job creation is not taken seriously by the government. The government, what is happening with this Julia? What is wrong with my Julia? Yes. Mr. Speaker, the market issue shows that the question of job creation is not taken seriously by the government. The government never publishes the unemployment rate. Now, what is its employment policy? Nor does it publish any manpower survey, or indeed when it conducts any. It is conventional wisdom that big construction projects are job spinners and ought to employ many Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, unlike the PNC in government, the PPC government does not guarantee employment to Guyanese in big international projects within Guyana. The Chinese workers, for example, were preferred over the Guyanese workers in the Marriott case. The APNU recommends to this government that in all such contracts, they must include what we call in our day a guyanization clause. That clause not only guarantees work for the Guyanese workers, but ensures that whatever project or entity there is would be taken over gradually over time by Guyanese labor and Guyanese talent and Guyanese skill. Russell. Mr. Speaker, you would recall that in the last presentation last year, I greeted Dr. Nanda Gopal well. I informed him about the intuitions of his predecessor. And I trusted the type of treatment that the Honorable Minister of Labor, then Honorable Minister of Labor, had meted out to the Guyanese workers in the bauxite industry. You know, I pointed out to the Honorable Member that we had to seek recourse in a no confidence motion against the Minister to get him to do his work and to do well by the Guyanese workers in that industry. I thought that he had taken my word seriously. It is evident, Mr. Speaker, that he has not. The PPP administration has been deliberately lax in ensuring that the bauxite company of Guyana, Russell for short, observes and respects the laws of Guyana, particularly in the area of the adherence to the occupational health and safety regulations. This is evident by the following developments. One, Russell workers at our rival worksite were recently injured as a consequence of gross violations of the regulations and procedures for the disposal of explosives. As a result, many were injured. Many were injured and some severely. Two, Russell suspended 67 workers who protested for unsafe working conditions and its operations during May 2009. Shortly afterwards, Russell dismissed 5 workers who were protesting over the unsanitary conditions for the storage of food materials in areas infested by rodents and roaches in the kitchen where meals were usually prepared for the staff at our rival location. Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of those above stated developments, these same matters were listed as differences for resolution by way of arbitration to be conducted by the Ministry of Labor. However, having inherited the problem, Dr. Nanda Gopal false started a purported invocation of compulsory arbitration by his failure to sign the notice himself, as was required, instead of the chief labor officer. And the result was, Russell took advantage of this and took the minister to court. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know years ago, we had requested that we introduce an industrial code in Guyana so that matters of labor would not be bogged down in the general malaise in the wider justice system. The president, who was in fact seated over there at that time, was very favorable to the idea, but thought that we would look at it down the line. That was maybe 5 years ago. And I trust that we will look at it now again, now that the honorable member is president of Guyana. The point, in fact, is that the Guyana Bauxite Union obviously would have been shut out from this arrangement where they went to court. And so they had to intervene in that matter, and they got leave from the Chief Justice to do so. And recognizing, my junior, that recognizing that if the matter was left like that, it would be for another 20 years. The GP and GW lawyers suggested that the matter be resolved and that the minister restart the proceedings and sign again. The minister agreed to that, and so the matter was withdrawn. Mr. Speaker, that was over a year ago. That was over a year ago. And the Honorable Minister of Labor has not seen it fit to restart in the correct way the compulsory arbitration between for the workers of the bauxite industry and the Russell company. They can't do that. But a month ago, GPL had a strike. And GPL in that bargaining unit had to deal with NASI. Now, many of you might not know that. But the Honorable Minister Nanda Gopal was the Secretary General of NASI for years. Very experienced, very experienced. That's why one has to wonder, how come he didn't sign the invocation documents himself instead of giving it to the public servant to sign? But you know, but Mr. Speaker, what we know was that after about a week, the minister himself intervened in that strike. Intervened in that strike. And on this occasion, signing the relevant documents for the arbitration proceedings. Signed it. What is wrong with that? You can't live. Because you would have heard about nepotism and corruption. No, I'm not saying you're involved in that. I want you to get me clear. Now, Speaker. Questions must have to be asked, Mr. Speaker. How could this Minister of Labour, the Honourable Member, move so swiftly to resolve this matter involving Nasi? And after all these years, they still have the bauxite workers at the mercy of Brussels. The man even attempted to whip them with a spade. That's why they brought our Guyanese workers down. That's why this government has brought the Guyanese. They have no respect for the Guyanese workers. I've been calling on this minister to use his being in the same manner in which he intervened in the GPN last year. And this time we assure you, we will bring this to a continuation. Mr. Speaker, this government, this government likes to say that it is a working class government. They have the interests of the workers at heart. But do they, Mr. Speaker? Do they? When the Honorable President, late President Dr. Cheney Jagan was in power, the attitude that he displayed to the workers of Ghana was so substantially different from his successors. He ensured that he had increases that were above the rate of inflation. And if there was a slight, even a slight increase in GDP, he wanted to share part of that increase with the workers of Ghana. But alas, since his demise, I don't believe that he would like to come and sit amongst the members of the other side. I don't believe that he would like to sit. What is occurring right now, Mr. Speaker? This government has a duty to take care of our workers. And they have neglected this duty. They have neglected it. As we are saying, we want you to come. And we believe that you must act presently and you must act now. Do it now. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I leave with you and this honorable house this little verse. This verse is titled The Lament of a Guyanese Worker. The lament of a Guyanese worker. And I quote, "Don't cry for me, PPPC. The truth is, you never really loved me. All through my hungry days, my poverty-stricken existence, you kept your silence and you kept your distance." Mr. Speaker, I talked about the authorship. None other than Pastor Willis Esquire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams, for your contribution to life of the Assembly this afternoon. I invite the other member, Mr. Robert Assad, who I'm sure will add life to it. Continue.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, that vision, as the Minister of Finance mentioned, is contained in a number of documents. An important one being the Low Carbon Development Strategy, a document that has not only been celebrated and supported locally, but one that is winning international support. And so we must recognize how the budget was framed and the context and the perspectives that are so reflected in the document. Mr. Speaker, over the past several hours, listening to the debate and the contribution of the opposition points to a number of factors. The first one, as some of my colleagues would have mentioned, shows that the opposition so far, because there are many others to come, there are many bigger guns to come, as it were, so far has been unable to pick weaknesses, they've been unable to criticize or to show the demerits or to show the errors, as it were, in the measures and the policies that I've outlined. And Mr. Speaker, there has not been a single strong criticism of any policy that has been contained in the budget. And the fact that we've seen this, Mr. Speaker, certainly indicates that we get a feeling of reluctant endorsement, and which we welcome. A feeling of reluctant endorsement, and that is good. It is something that we should all admire each other, that when something is good, we should compliment, we should praise. Not because it comes from the other side, and likewise when there are good ideas and good suggestions from the opposition, the government give consideration. So by the omission or the inability to come up with any sound, strong, effective criticism of the budget so far certainly indicates that we have a document, we have a budget here that in a way, in a manner, enjoys some form of support from the opposition. And it's a compliment that I'm offering, not necessarily a criticism. And what I just forced speakers to do so far, Mr. Speaker, including the honorable member who just spoke before. Actually, I was surprised by the, not only brevity, but the lack of depth in terms of looking at the issue. And what we find so far, Mr. Speaker, is a number, the focus is being on addressing extraneous matters. And a lot of it is addressing issues that have been repeated and repeated and repeated over. And we go to the old lines of corruption, discrimination, marginalization, and the list goes on. And Mr. Speaker, the line and the points raised have been old arguments made since 1992, as was recognized by the honorable member. And these accusations have been effectively debunked, parliament after parliament, public inquiries, various investigations, and even those constitutional bodies have found that the claims and the accusations have been empty, and they continue to be without any substance or value. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we also hear issues where the debate now is being transformed into a complaints forum. As we just heard from the honorable member who preceded me, you have a bone to pick. If you have a bone to pick with the judiciary, you come here and use that.
You
have a problem with my family?
Yes.
Gentlemen, excuse me. One second, let us not, honorable members, make any comments about other persons' families. I recall last year, Mrs. Bakker, and rightly so, took umbrage when there was a mention of, I believe, a relative of hers, such was correct. And so, if a minister is speaking or a member is speaking, let us avoid at all costs any reference any minister's family. If, of course, if there's an issue with a minister, let us deal with the minister, but avoid their children, their families. If there's a substantive motion on the floor that wishes to go to that, then we will consider it. But until such time, I would ask that we, whether by way of sort of voting comments, heckling, or otherwise, families, in my view, should be sacrosanct and away from.
Mr. Speaker, just to say that I'm very proud of the people who surround me. My family, my logical family, and the family of the PPP. I am not embarrassed. Honest and say that. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we need to also look at the budget as a document that recognizes the need for us to construct a society that one is inclusive and one that provides opportunities for all our people, particularly current and future generations. And I say so, Mr. Speaker, because we are a country with a particular makeup. We're a country that has had a history of struggle. We're a country whereby we've undergone some serious challenges immediately, and certainly if we look deep and look very deep into our history. And we need to recognize that in going forward, Mr. Speaker, it is the responsibility of all of us to ensure that the type of measures and policies that we put in place continue to create a country in which every single Guyanese, notwithstanding race, notwithstanding religion, notwithstanding social status, my colleague to be a part of the Parliamentary. And that is what, Mr. Speaker, this budget also seeks to do. It creates an environment and the opportunity for inclusion. And if we look at all the measures that have been detailed and outlined by the Minister of Finance, we will certainly point to that. But Mr. Speaker, this budget does not only offer up those measures for inclusion in terms of people's participation in the development of our country. It does not only give us the opportunity, every single Guyanese, to write the story of development, but also it gives us here, elected leaders, the opportunity to create and to build a culture of tolerance, to build a culture of creating a Guyana for all. And that is what also, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity that this budget presents. Several speakers before me, and I remember the lead spokesman on finance, the Honorable Carl Greenwich, raised the issue, and certainly reference was made to the Minister of Finance's comments about political dialogue and political consultation. The records will show, Mr. Speaker, that we in the PPP, and now the PPP Civic, we have not only talked the talk, but we have walked the walk when it comes to political consultation and political cooperation. And if we look at our history, when Dr. Jagan was elected Premier in the 1960s, he came out and he offered half of the cabinet to the breakaway PPP that became the PNC, to Forbes Burnham, the late President Forbes Burnham, half of the cabinet here. And if we look throughout our period, where we get that from? Our history. It's contained in our history. The honorable leader of the opposition, a very versed historian, he can probably point you to that address. But Mr. Speaker, over the years too, even when the late Forbes Burnham, President Forbes Burnham, was in government, he also made overtures. And there were positive responses again from the PPP in the form of critical support in the 1970s, and even just before his death in 1985 too, when there were some form of discussions. And even, Mr. Speaker, even if we look in recent history, in the 1990s, even when we were coming towards the end of that struggle for the return of democracy, the PPP, and from the opposition side again, sought to create unity, to forge alliances. And we had the Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, something that the honorable members Gail Teixeira and Dr. Rupert Rudner-Ryan might be quite familiar with. And again, those show effort. And then if we look throughout the PPP civic in office and the efforts that have been made, starting with right here, where's City Hall, right across at City Hall, when we saw that we're going to use the Mandela formula in terms of sharing the governance, and Dr. Jardine said let's start it at the City Hall, whereby, and we said that we will allow the orders of support to go first because of the makeup of the City Council. When it was time for the PPP candidate to become mayor, and the PPP Civic even presented a document which is called Political Cooperation, that is a building trust for political cooperation, in which it enunciated a roadmap to bring about enhanced political dialogue with the aim of lifting and making much more substantive political cooperation. And there have been a number of efforts. Some we've seen some progress, some we've seen some positive response from the opposition, others we've seen those opportunities squandered. And Mr. Speaker, whilst I don't want to go into the details of what took place prior to the budget, but certainly one cannot ignore the fact that efforts were made, discussions were held to entertain the views not only of the opposition, but of the wider Guyanese society, so that at the end of the day, we will have a document that reflects the aspirations and also that reflects the needs of our people. And so when we talk about political dialogue and political cooperation, Mr. Speaker, we must ensure that we do what it takes. And even if we look at what has been the response by other stakeholders, the positive response of other stakeholders, and also the silence, in a way, from the opposition so far, shows that there has been some level of consensus. 2013 reflects what the people of Guyana want, but more so, it points to a collective vision of taking our country forward. But Mr. Speaker, in the minister's presentation, he referred to the performance of the various sectors of the economy, both the traditional as well as the new and emerging sector. And yesterday, my colleague, Minister Fanali, quoted one of the Caribbean reports, and which a number of other studies have confirmed that countries such as Guyana, which possess the type of rich natural resources, that we are in a position to withstand global and other difficulties. And Mr. Speaker, what this government has been doing, and the measures contained in the 2013 budget, will certainly reinforce policies and measures that will see our country developing our natural resources in a way to bring about prosperity for all our people. And already, when we look at the performance of some of the subsector within the natural resources sector, we will see already that they are positioning themselves for growth, for expansion, and also the provision of more opportunities for people. Take, for instance, gold, Mr. Speaker. In 2011, gold exploration was 363,000 ounces. Last year, it rose to 438 1,645 ounces, the highest ever outside of Omai. Mr. Speaker, and also if you look at the target this year set of 451,000 ounces, certainly points to a sector that is growing. But let me dwell a bit on gold, because if we look at gold itself, its contribution to GDP is significant. And that is why thousands of hard-working people within the gold mining and the wider mining sector are offended when they are described in the most demeaning of terms about their activities. Mr. Speaker, we are building a mining sector, a gold mining sector, that every day that we want to modernize. We want to improve extraction and recovery. Currently it's about 35 to 40%. We are embarking and introducing and working with the mining community, the Miners Association, in introducing technology that will see us improving recovery rates in the 90s. We're also looking at technologies that are very green, environmentally friendly, moving away from mercury-free technology. And Mr. Speaker, last year alone, we had for the first time the importation of close to 12 mercury-free gold processing plants into the country. And the miners themselves have done that, Mr. Speaker, and they must be commended. These are not plants that were imported by the government and distributed, and we've issued an edict. The miners on their own have taken the initiative because of their sense of responsibility, but certainly also because of our insistence to that we conduct mining in a very safe and environmentally friendly way. But Mr. Speaker, this sector has brought about life to communities that had lost hope. And let us go into Region 1, Port Kaituma area. Mr. Speaker, we go to parts of Region 7, Region 8, Mr. Speaker, and even other towns and areas that support the activity. And even right here in Georgetown, we will see the thousands who on a daily basis depend on mining and mining-related activities. And they're not all prostitutes, as someone wants to suggest. Mr. Speaker,
there has been no suggestion that prostitutes.
Mr. Speaker, might I clarify? Mr. Speaker, I can clarify and then withdraw what you said. The context of my reference to prostitute is that the Honorable Member, Mr. Vulcan, in his presentation said that there was prostitution being brought within. And I'm saying that when my reference to the thousands, saying that they're not all prostitutes.
But I don't think Mr. Vulcan meant that.
I'm not suggesting that he does that, Mr. Speaker.
Or he never in Florida. And I can tell you myself, as a frequent visitor to the interior, that it does breed and is breeding trafficking in persons. That is a fact. I think we accept that, but Mr. Vulcan was not implying that equal prostitution.
Mr. Speaker, what I just made was a clear statement of fact that when we go out there, everyone is not a prostitute. And that all miners are not engaged in prostitution. And what we have is progressive, hard-working people who are seeking to eat and they it or to be damned and shamed for some political reason. Mr. Speaker, and we are also looking at two large-scale mining plants. We have the Aurora as well as the ETK Sand Spring, whereby we're looking again as part of that transformation of the gold mining sector. Mr. Speaker, but if you look at the other area, because mining and quarrying last year contributed close to 11% of GDP, a significant chunk of the GDP. And if we look at bauxite performance, to Mr. Speaker, we will see that we've been able to, more or less, under this government, we've been able to revive what has been a dying industry to one that is very vibrant today. And if we look at the production, let us not talk about bauxite now, Mr. Ramjadai. And if we look in terms of production, 2011 production was about 1.8 million tons. Last year, notwithstanding the disruption of both sides' operation due to the unrest in Linden, bauxite output recorded with 2.2 million tons, Mr. Speaker. It shows the dynamism, it shows the growth in activities, the opportunities, and the jobs that are being created because of the instrumentality of the PPP Civic working with investors, working with the communities too, in bringing about life, bringing about economic activities to those communities. And Mr. Speaker, we need to recognize that. We need to recognize that because whilst we have been pursuing growth and have been pursuing new and emerging sectors of economy, this government has not neglected the traditional sectors of rice, sugar, and bauxite. And that is why if we look at the budget, we continue to place emphasis on investments in those areas. And Mr. Speaker, as the Honorable Minister of Finance has done, he has reviewed the performance, and I need not to repeat that in terms of the growth, and even in some areas we've had a decline, take for instance in forestry for a number of factors. But these, certainly Mr. Speaker, have pointed to a very dynamic, expanding and growing natural resources sector that can only bring about more wealth, more prosperity, and more opportunities for people. But Mr. Speaker, whilst we move and we put emphasis on the development of the natural resources sector, we are also doing so in harmony with the environment. And our low carbon development strategy sets out that pathway. It outlines that vision. It gives us the direction in which we can have, as it were, both worlds. That is, be able to develop our natural resources and at the same time manage, preserve our environment. So much so that as a nation, we've been able to earn in excess of $150 million US from environmental services of our rainforest due to sound environmental management.
But on a daily basis, residents continue to face hardship. The budgetary allocation to Region 5 continue to be inadequate. Hence, the affairs of the region are not properly administered, and this is hindering development in all sectors. Sir, the purpose and function of any government is to sustain the welfare and the well-being of all people, rich and poor, young and old, and such. The budget is not a statement to be taken in isolation. It is a part of a design to bring great happiness and comfort to all Guyanese. The emphasis and the objective is and must always be the happiness of the people. Mr. Speaker, prior to this budget, the APNU members of Parliament embarked on a series of outreaches in 6 out of 10 administrative regions. We went into the highways and byways. We spoke to the residents, Mr. Speaker, in the various communities, and we listened to their stories and concerns as to how they feel their issues should be addressed. I would like to thank these patriotic citizens most profoundly, for my presentation today was aided by them. What is of great concern is the fact that many of these persons and groups claim that they have also voiced their concerns to the members of the government. Mr. Speaker, as such, I am disappointed for I know that these issues were not addressed in the budget. I recall that during previous debates, I spoke about some very critical problems affecting people of Region 5. Matters which required urgent attention, but the government completely ignored the needs of the people. Mr. Speaker, whenever I stand to speak, I don't mislead this House. I have issues from Region 5. Budget 2030 is before us, and so now I turn my attention to rice. At page 18, the Honorable Minister outlined the achievements in the rice industry as another record performance. Mr. Speaker, I stand there as a messenger of Region number 5. I stand there to deliver a message from the farmers of Region number 5. I have said before, and I will continue to say, that Region 5 is the largest agricultural region in the country, and therefore our input to the country's development is very important. All is not well in the agriculture sector in Region 5. A collaborative approach is required to address the key obstacles faced by farmers to ensure that the limited resources are used effectively and efficiently. Mr. Speaker, priority must be given to the implementation of measures to reduce flooding in the flood-prone areas on a timely basis. Maintenance of access roads, dams, drains, structures, canals, embankment, empoldering of rice lands, repairs to cokers and sluices must always be ongoing. We know that huge sums of money are spent in some areas to rehabilitate farming communities. But what is worrying, Mr. Speaker, is the failure to manage the business of the state. Cattle continue to ravage farmers and destroy the infrastructure. Tractor owners continue to traverse the dams on a daily basis, in and out of the rainy seasons. And these are the big ones, Mr. Speaker. I'm asking that measures be put in place to deal with these unacceptable behaviors. Mr. Speaker, that meeting, the minister decided to have set up a land review committee. Mr. Minister, remember that? And so this land committee, Mr. Bishop, Honorable Member Bishop, very good man, he headed this review committee. I said an honorable man. He headed this committee. And we had 6 such consultations in Region 5. We had 3 in my code. Farmers came out and they expressed their feelings and concerns. Mr. Speaker, this package went to the Honorable Minister. Andrew Bishop, that's right. And so, this package is with the then Agriculture Minister. I'm asking the now Agriculture Minister, please to collect that very package. Please collect that package from the Minister so that we can proceed with feelings that expressed during that period. Farmers came out and they expressed their feelings, Mr. Minister. And so I need you to get that package so that we could have a way forward. There were farmers also whose loans the then president restructured because, Current Speaker, he had to do that to save their properties and give them the opportunity to go back